We'll try to make this as brief as we can. One of the most important things is going to be for you to become a little bit familiar with Submittable because it's a new platform that we're using this year. And then for those of you who are first-time grant review volunteers, the whole overview of the grant process will be important for you to be aware of. So thank you for volunteering and thank you for coming tonight. So we'll just go ahead and get started. So what we're going to go over tonight is the eligibility guidelines for the nonprofits to apply, the grant review and financial review committee structures, the responsibilities and ethics, grant review process, financial review, how to evaluate grant applications using Submittable, and then there's a process overview flowchart, which this time it will be kind of nice. If you have this recording, you can go back and look at that if you need to. Next steps, and then the grant review timeline. I should also say, I think Roseanne kind of did it, but I'm Tracy Zeman. I'm one of the co-chairs for the grant process. Denise is the other chair. And then Colleen, who is our treasurer on the board, she heads up the financial review committee. So that's who we are. So the nonprofits, as you might know already, they already submitted their LOI applications. And Denise and I have already reviewed those and already invited them to apply for the full grant. I need to move my little screen thing so I can see my whole screen here. So in order for a nonprofit to be eligible for our grant, they have to be classified as a public charity with tax exempt status, which means they're a 501c3, and then be in possession of 3 years of financial statements with a minimum of 1 year of independently prepared audited financial statements, and have an annual operating budget of at least $250,000. So we actually did have only one nonprofit this year that did not meet that annual operating budget or the financial statement requirement. But the rest of them did. So we have it, Colleen will talk a little bit more probably about why those are our financial requirements a little bit later when she talks about financial review. Grant eligibility guidelines and nonprofit projects. So one of the really important things you'll need to be aware of when you read the grant is that the grant is supposed to predominantly serve residents of Oakland County. We are Impact100 Oakland County. We want our grant monies to serve the residents of our county. Now, it might not entirely be within the county, and the organization might be in Wayne County or Macomb County, but as long as the service they're providing is for Oakland County, that's what's important. Have a measurable high impact on beneficiaries, not received an impact grant in the previous 3 years. And we're, this is our 5th grant cycle, so we haven't really had many repeats yet because anyone who got a grant, they would just now be able to reapply. And one rule that was different from previous years, I think we started it last year, is that each nonprofit can only submit 1 application. We used to allow nonprofits to submit more than 1 application, and now each nonprofit can only have 1 in a year. Demonstrate a sustainable plan. That means we want them to be able to show, like, how will you keep this going once you've used these funds? Have a total project budget of at least $85,000. $85,000 is the amount this year that we're able to give. We are giving out 3 grants of $85,000 apiece, which is directly tied to the number of members that we have. And they have to expend the funds within 36 months. Some of them will do it in 1 year, and some of them will do it in more than 1. It's up to them and the project. The grant committee structure, Denise and I are the grant committee co-chairs, which means that we oversee the entire process. We don't actually sit on one of the focus committees. The grant review process committee also includes Ginny Fishbach and Catherine DeClaudio. So Denise and I work with those other 2 board members on discussions we have about how to use Submittable, things that we're going to change about the process. They're sort of our larger committee. And then we have the grant review committee chairs. So these are volunteers, usually they're board members, and they actually head up those different focus areas. Am I going too fast, or is everybody, does it seem okay?
Hey, sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. So our grant review committee chairs this year, our education is Allie Mandeville and Emily Rollins. Family is Kim Martin and Angel Lau. Arts and culture is Linda Erickson. Environment and recreation is Ginny Fishbach, who was the grant co-chair last year. And health and wellness is Jessie Bell. And then financial grant review committee chair is Colleen. So your responsibilities are to attend this committee training or to watch it later, review and evaluate the grant applications, attend and participate in your meetings with your focus group, determine which applications will proceed to the next phase, participate in site visits with selected applicants, and attend the annual meeting or vote absentee. So we invited, was it 54, I think, Denise? Yes. 54 nonprofits received the application to apply. So saying that they all submit grants, which I don't know if they all will, all submit applications, we would then divide those up along the focus areas. And we have them select multiple focus areas in the application so that we can try to divide them as evenly as possible. There's a lot of overlap between family, health and wellness, and education. I'm sure you can imagine that there's not as much overlap in an arts and culture grant. Probably they could overlap with education or environment and rec. So in the past, environment and rec and arts and culture tend to have fewer applications that will be reviewed. And then I think health and wellness usually has the most, but we do our best to try to divide them. So you will probably have somewhere between 5 and 10 applications that you will be reading. And then when you meet in that round 1 meeting, you will pick 2 or 3 that will then move on to that second phase. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Denise to talk about ethics and then the confidentiality agreement.
So just a word about the ethics of being on a grant review committee. It's very important for you to maintain your confidentiality, and that's the applicants, the entire process, the information that you see in the proposals or the projects that are put forth for funding, and also all the discussions that happen in your committees. And another part of our ethics is to make sure that there is no conflict of interest between you and your family and the nonprofits that are applying for grant money. So Tracy, next slide, please. So we have a formal conflict of interest and confidentiality policy for Impact 100. And tomorrow I'll be sending you a copy of that, and also a confidentiality and conflict of interest agreement. So what's a conflict of interest? That's some affiliation between you or a member of your family where that relationship is that of being an owner, a shareholder, a director, a trustee, officer, partner, or employee of one of the nonprofits. Really anything that would that you or your family would derive benefits from, financial or otherwise. And again, as far as confidentiality, we want to make sure that the information that you learn during this process is not shared, and that confidentiality extends beyond selecting our grant, the finalists. That goes on, that goes on beyond the selection process. It just shouldn't be talked about as far as the discussions you have during your grant review meetings or any of the projects that you see that come up in the grant.
We have had in the past someone who works at a nonprofit that has been a recipient or is applying that year be part of grant review. So that would be a good example of when they would let us know that, so we would be sure not to put them in the committee that their
Right, and if
lawyer's grant would be in.
correct, so if you have a conflict of interest, we can easily put you on a different grant review committee, so there would be no conflict for the grants that you're reviewing. And again, you'll get an email from me tomorrow that has our full policy and that conflict of interest form where you can identify any conflict of interest that you have.
And then Denise, I would add, I know this is a common question that has come up in prior trainings. You can list out the nonprofits you may be affiliated with in this first form that you see, but once you're assigned your actual applications, if you have a list of 10 and then you see those 10 and all of a sudden you're like, wait, I forgot to list that one. At the conflict of interest form says that upon realization that a conflict of interest exists, then you will alert us. So you can also see your applicants that you will be reviewing. And at that time, if you see a conflict, you can send Tracy or Denise an email and we will deal with it at that time.
Yes, correct.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Okay, so on to the financial grant review responsibilities. So we like to tie the financial review and grant review together so that the whole team knows what each subset is doing, kind of, so everyone has an idea of everybody's roles and responsibilities. So just so everyone is aware, with each focus area, there are 2 financial people assigned to that area. So you will have 2 people working as a part of your focus area committee that are specifically assigned to address any financial issues that arise. They will be conducting their own kind of financial review and relaying that information to the committee. So you as a grant committee member are not responsible for opening up balance sheets and income statements and cash flows and understanding this. You have 2 women who are doing that on your team. The financial review women are able to participate in the actual grant review side as well if their time permits. So they can be a voting member on the grant review and also be conducting the financial review. I really leave it up to the women volunteers based on what their schedule permits. So outside of that, you're attending this training and we have some financial people signed in here. In terms of what else they'll do, they will review all the financial data submitted by the nonprofit, and they will be looking at 2 main things. They will be looking at the organization overall's financial health and rating it either green, yellow, or red. So green is we see absolutely no issues with the organizational's financial health. Yellow is kind of proceed with caution, and red is, we see major red flags with this organization. They will also be doing the same rating for the project budget that outlines specifically how the $85,000 is being spent. You as a grant committee member have access to all of this information, but again, it's for you to look at, but you don't necessarily have to analyze. In addition to rating those 2 things, they will be providing specific questions as part of the site visit for any financial information that has come up that they want answered. It could be management turnover. It could be, why did revenue go down or up? Why are expenses going down or up? Any of these questions are the roles and responsibilities of the financial grant review committee member to address. They'll also participate in the site visits, and then they will fill out a final rating that you guys use as part of the grant committee to narrow down the finalists. And that's pretty much it as far as the financial review committee responsibilities. Tracy, you can go to the next slide. So similar to what Denise addressed, anyone who sits on the financial review and also the grant committee, you have access to very confidential documents. These nonprofits are submitting interim financials that are not public. We just ask that everyone uses their judgment to not print these, not leave them places because they are confidential information. And again, this goes beyond just when you're reviewing them. It goes, you know, on a forward basis as well.
Sorry, my cat wanted out of my bedroom.
So I will be conducting a more in-depth actual training for the financial review participants, but this kind of just goes over brief that we will be looking at a variety of documents. We will be looking to make sure after round one, when your committee meets, you're narrowing it down to 1 to 3 applicants that you would like to push forward to round 2. So the very first step that happens with financial review is we look at those 1 to 3 that the focus committee has narrowed it down to, and we ensure they've submitted all the necessary documents. The necessary documents are 3 years of financial statements with at least one of those being audited, 3 years of 990s, unaudited interim financial statements, and then also the project budget for the $85,000. So the financial review liaison will make sure all of those are submitted. And if there is a missing document, they will let me know, and I will contact the nonprofit, and they have 48 hours to provide us the necessary documents to proceed. Historically, we definitely have had nonprofits just accidentally upload the same 990 twice or the same financial statement twice. They are kind of common human errors that occur. And most are very receptive and quick to get us the correct document. So this has been a good process over the past few years.
Now, Colleen, would you, I would think most everyone opens the project budget. Probably everyone who's reviewing it, but then the grant review committee might not open some of those other financial documents.
There's actually a couple of questions that everyone needs to answer, and I think they need to look at the project budget to answer those couple of questions.
Yeah, I think the project budget is the one Excel spreadsheet or PDF that almost the entire grant committee should open up, because it does outline, it is typically answered in the actual questions, but it's a great just view of the breakdown of how the money's being spent. I think the only thing in the past we've seen is sometimes the nonprofit has filled it out incorrectly, in that the sum of the column might not be 85,000, it's like 185,000, because that's the total project budget. So if there's something where they just incorrectly filled it out, again, I'll reach out to them to just clarify or have them resubmit it.
Okay.
And then, so about mid-August, when it turns to round 2, so we've checked the list and all of the top 1 to 3 have the information provided. Your financial review volunteers will go into a deep dive financial analysis for about 2 weeks. And during this time, they're really diving into all of the documents they've submitted. They fill out our own spreadsheet analysis that we've developed, as well as do that rating system. This will be all information that they will email to the focus area chair, and then that chair will share it with the general committee. In addition to that, they will be coming up with questions. And again, all of this will be shared with the committee. So all of the financial review committee members have been named to focus areas. They should be reaching out to the focus area chairs. And as stated before, if their time permits, they'll join your meetings, that the intro meetings kicking off in a couple weeks here, as well as your round 1. But if you don't see or hear from your financial review, they will just be participating in the deep dive analysis that begins around mid-August.
So next we're going to talk about evaluation and ranking. I'm going to go over this slide, but then after this, Denise is going to kind of walk you through a little bit more in depth in submittable. So ultimately, we're answering the following question. Does the proposal describe a meaningful project that's built upon a good idea that can be successfully implemented by a trustworthy, competent organization that's determined to execute it? And I think this might be a good time to also let you know that I think a lot of people use the strategy of sort of reading through all the grants once before then going in and beginning to do your review. You know, you might want to go into submittable and read all of them completely and then go back and then review them, because your ideas about what might be a meaningful project or a competent organization might change as you read through all 10 applications. And I felt when I did grant review myself that they sort of naturally fell into either pretty good applications, sort of, you know, somewhere in the middle, and then there's always seems to be a couple that are not very well written, or they've applied for something that we don't really fund. So I would encourage you to read through them all first before beginning your review.
And I agree, when I've done grant reviews, that was very helpful to read through every grant first and then go back and actually try and do the numerical ranking as to, you know, what I was going to rate it. It helps a lot.
I think I ended up breaking it up over 2 nights, where I read half one evening and half the next evening and then did my evaluation afterwards. It actually is not as time consuming as I thought it would be to read through the applications. They're not super, super long, but after I read, you know, 5 of them, I was ready to kind of take a break, to maybe even just give the rest of the grants the attention I had given the first few that I read. And you also might consider not reading them all in the order in which you see them, so that not everyone in your committee reads the first one first, you know, and the last one last, because you get tired and you might want to consider kind of, you know, clicking around and looking at the different ones. Okay.
Okay. So we are very happy to have new software this year, Submittable. And we are using that software we already used it for the letters of inquiry, and we're going to be accepting the full grant applications in there. And we're also very happy to say that the actual review process, the ranking of those applications are going to be in the software this year. So every grant review committee member and financial committee member will have access. For those of you that don't have a submittable account, I know many of you do because you submitted your interest in which focus group you were interested in. But for anyone that does not have a submittable account, you'll be receiving an email by July 15th inviting you to log in and establish your account. And then the actual grant reviews start near the end of July 29th. So you'll be receiving an email letting you know which grants you've been assigned to. And when you go into Submittable, you will only see the grants that you have been assigned, and you'll only see the grants that you're going to review. And again, as Tracy and I just said, we really recommend that you read every grant before you start the rating process. So next slide, Tracy. So when you actually get your grants assigned, you're going to receive an email from Submittable, and there's a sample of it here on the screen. And there's 2 ways to go in, and I'm pointing at my screen so you can all see this, right? So there's 2 ways to click through. You can click through on the one that says submittable.com submissions, or below that are the actual 3 grants, and you can click on those one at a time to look at individual grants. And so now I'm going to go into Submittable. Okay. So when you go into Submittable, what you'll see on your screen are the grants that have been assigned to you. So these are the 3 grants that I have assigned. One is Ginny's Test, one is Pugs for Hugs, and one is Test with Collab. This number right here, 46, that's telling me that I've already ranked or rated Ginny's Test. So I'm going to go into Pugs for Hugs by simply clicking on the title of the application. so the screen is in two parts. On the left-hand side is the actual grant, and you can use this to scroll through the grant and read through it. So you do have the option of reading the grant on the screen and making notes as you want, you know, on a legal pad or whatever. The other way is if you're a person that wants to see it on paper, you go here to the More button, download the form to a PDF, and then once you have it as a PDF on your computer, you can print it, okay? On the right-hand side is the actual review. So this is where you're going to rank the various applications. So I'm going to move through the instructions here. So what Tracy and I and Colleen have talked about is there's really two rounds of the review. The first one is the round one review, and that's the first review you do, and that's the ranking you do once you read the application. Round two, the second review, is after you perform the site visit. So when you go in the first time, everyone's doing round one, and you need to select round one to get the appropriate questions. The first section of questions is about the strength of the organization. So this actually is also the first part of the grant application. The first part is about the organization and some of its history, contacts, that type of thing. The other thing is when you're doing the review of the organization, you may want to also go to the nonprofit's website to see what their website says. And then there's a couple charity websites, Charity Navigator and
GuideStar.
And GuideStar. Both of those you can find information about nonprofits too. So that's the first few questions here in the review. All of the questions, you give a ranking of 1 through 5, with 1 being strongly disagree, 2 disagree, 3 is your neutral, 4 you agree, 5 strongly agree. The second set of questions has to do with the actual project that the nonprofit is putting through for funding. And that is the second part of the grant. Is the project information. And so these questions will go with the project. The last part of the review is actually we have you, after you read everything, decide if this grant actually fulfills our grant criteria. There are no specific questions that answer these questions, but it's your general impression after you've read the whole thing. And this is the one area, because the third section is actually for the financial people. There's a whole financial information section. And I think for these final grant criteria, some of these do have to do with how the money is being spent. You probably will have to look at the budget, which is here, the first part of the financial section. And to look at the budget, all you do is click on it and it'll come up on your screen. Okay. So then once you've done all of your rankings, oh, and by the way, these last ones are yes and no questions. The preferred answer is yes. If for some reason you think that they don't meet our criteria, answer no, but you still submit your review, and that'll be discussed with your chair in your first meeting. So once you've answered all the questions, you hit finalize the review. And now if I go back to my list, you'll see that I have 2 of the grants have been rated by myself, and I know that I have 1 left down here because it doesn't have a rating. So one of the things you can do once you've rated all of your grants, you can use this plus and minus sign to rank the grants in order of how you've rated them. And this is a good final test to say, you know, did I think Hugs for Hugs was the best one I read? You'll have many more than this, but you can see like the first 2 or 3 that float to the top. Are those the ones that you felt were the best that you read? And maybe if it doesn't quite line up to how you felt, you may want to go back and relook at your ratings and redo it. And once you have rated something, you simply go back in and you can change your ratings and it'll change your score.
Denise, can you talk
Yep.
for a second about collaboration and how those grants, those applications will look a little different?
So actually, that's this one test grant that we put in here. This is an application that has collaboration. So in a collaborating scenario, it's actually two nonprofits that are working together to put forward a grant for consideration. And Colleen can help me with this, but generally this is done because one has the financial requirements that we're looking for. They have the audited financial statements. And more than likely, they're the ones that are going to manage the budget for perhaps the smaller nonprofit. So when you go through these sections, not only will you have information about the nonprofit that's applying, you will also have information for the collaborating organization. But the project itself is all one project. It's only the organization that is two. And then for the financial people, when you get down to the financial section, there's two sets of financial statements.
Yes, and so we call it the lead agency. So the lead nonprofit would be meeting all of our eligibility requirement in regards to the financials, and then the collaborating agency could be, you know, a smaller nonprofit. All of the monies from the grant will flow to that lead agency. So we're essentially the financial team will get comfortable with the lead agency, knowing that they're the ones controlling the money, submitting the reports, and keeping track of how the money is flowing to this collaborating agency.
So for the financial people on the call, you will see collaborating agency financial statements. So, so there'll be two sets of financial statements, two sets of 990s, two sets of interim. So there's two sets of every, you know, the same financial type of financial form.
And I know that we have at least one, I can't remember, Denise, if there's more than one, but I know we've got at least one grant that has a collaborator.
Yeah, I believe you. I don't remember any collaborating. So that's the difference for collaborating. You'll see information on two organizations, and there'll be financial statements for two organizations. I'm going to stop sharing, Tracy.
Okay. And I will share again, hopefully. Okay. Okay, so next steps. So you'll have your introductory meeting with your committee in a few weeks, and then you'll receive access to applications for your focus area in Submittable. Please feel free to email us with questions. I can help somewhat with Submittable, but Denise will maybe be more helpful than I will, especially with the review portion. You'll read and review your grants. You'll participate in the round 1 meeting. You'll decide on 2 to 3 applications to move to round 2. The financial review committee does their deep dive. You'll participate in the site visits, and then you will have another, I don't know, we didn't really need, I'm trying to remember. I think we did have one final meeting. It'll just depend on how clear it is of who your finalist will be about whether or not you need to have a final meeting after your site visits. And then you'll decide on your finalist. And actually, after you decide, well, here, I can talk about it in the flow chart, what happens after you decide on your finalist. So I'm not going to read this entire flow chart, even though Laura Liris, who chaired grants a couple years ago, made this, and I think it's a great way to sort of, in a one screen, see what happens. So you have the LOI, and we review the LOI. They get selected to apply for the full grant. you go through your process, the financial review does theirs, and then after you have your finalist, they are asked to submit a few more things to us. They actually need to submit a executive summary and a wish list, and they let us know who is going to be attending the annual event. And we actually now have a date for the annual event. Do I have the date wrong on this one? Is it the 5th?
I thought it was later.
I think it's the 12th. I think maybe I have it correct on the next screen and it's the 12th. I will let you know for sure. You'll hear that date a million times by the time you get to the end. But if you go back to this recording, or if anyone wants me to send them this individual slide, it's quite helpful for getting sort of the big picture view of how the process works. Yeah, the annual event is November 12th. I'll have to go back and change it on that slide because I thought it was later. So this is a little bit of your timeline. I believe I have sent you all a timeline in the last few emails that I sent. I probably didn't have the date of the annual meeting at that time, and I have it now. So I'm not going to go through this slide because I think we've already talked about how the process works. So maybe we can get to some Q&A and see if there's anything that we need to make more clear for you. So I'll stop sharing.
Okay.
And Roseanne will maybe help us with doing our Q&A.
Yep, absolutely. So far, there's only been one question in the Q&A, and I'll narrate it for everyone. It says, what if you are an active volunteer in one of the organizations? Is that considered a conflict of interest?
I don't think that's necessarily a conflict of interest, just volunteering for an organization. But if you feel you would be biased towards that organization, I would remove myself from evaluating the grants. I don't know what you think, Colleen and Tracy.
Yeah, so strictly being a volunteer or being involved in an organization under our policy is not a conflict. Really what we're trying to address with the conflict of interest is if you would financially, or a family member would financially benefit if they were awarded the $85,000 grant. So for example, like, you know, you would be paid some portion, or it would be something more like that. If you're just simply a volunteer, or you have an interest in that nonprofit, that itself is not a conflict.
Thank you very much. We've got a couple of other questions coming in, so keep them coming in, guys. The next question is, when will we know which committee we are in?
You should already be aware of what committee you are in. You should have received an email in the last week or two letting you know about your committee. So if you have not, you can send me an email and I will figure that out for you.
Thanks, Tracy. I see a couple more. Denise mentioned 2 websites that you can look at to find out more info about the nonprofits. What were those names of the 2 websites?
Charity Navigator
And GuideStar.
And GuideStar.
Yeah.
They give you an idea of of the financials of the group and how much they spend on administration and salaries, and they just give you an overview. They kind of rank them. And I don't know if both of them have a system where they will give them an actual ranking, like a 4 out of 5, but I know one of them does. So it's a good resource to go to look if you have questions. I personally went on all the websites of the organizations that I read about, or especially the ones that I was really interested in, just to see, you know, learn a little bit more about them when I was reviewing the grants.
Yeah, I thought the nonprofit websites were good too. Just to see how much in line what they're asking us for goes with what their organization does.
Yeah, and I always found it interesting to just Google the nonprofits too, and just see what news flows comes up about them. Like, have there been recent media or articles or management changes? I think that it's always a good idea to just do a little bit of research outside of just the application itself.
I want to go back to the previous question about knowing what your committee is.
Mm-hmm.
I'm now remembering what I did. So a couple weeks ago, I sent each committee an email saying, here are your fellow committee members. This is the committee that you're on. And then at this point, you probably should have received another email also from your chair saying, as a reminder, here's our introductory meeting. So, and that was based on that brief survey that you filled out on Submittable. So if for some reason you've been lost in that process, you'll definitely need to reach out to me.
I can provide you the name of that person also after the meeting, Tracy.
Okay.
All right, I see a few more questions if you guys are okay to move on. The next question is this the first year that there are collaboration submittals? I do not recall them from past years.
So I can talk to that. We've always had the ability for nonprofits to collaborate on projects. We probably, even from the first year, were never super promoting it. And we were never super clear that both organizations had to meet the criteria, et cetera, et cetera. Last year, we did have several collaborating agencies proposals, and we actually had one of our recipients last year was a collaboration. If you recall, we had Crossroads for Youth and Teacher's Pet was a really cool project where they were pairing troubled youth with dogs, dogs that actually they found when they paired them together was great for the youth, and it also increased the adoption rate of these dogs. So that was a really unique collaboration, and it really got us excited that we need to promote collaborating a little bit more with the nonprofits to really have two amazing nonprofits come together. So we have seen it in the past, but it is kind of part of the mission for the nonprofit outreach to promote it a little more. It's also a way for right now, given that our financial requirements are to have 1 year of an audit, this kind of level is typically with nonprofits that have 500,000 or more in gross receipts, with allowing a lead agent to meet that criteria, but a collaborating nonprofit to not necessarily have to meet that eligibility. It could potentially broaden the nonprofits that we could, award grants to. So we have had them in the past, but we're hoping to have more in the future.
Thanks, Colleen. All right, one more in the Q&A, and then I think there might be one in the chat. So in the Q&A, it says, I believe it was mentioned that we reached out to 54 nonprofits to apply to the available grants. Can you speak to how we chose the 54 we reached out to, if I heard correctly?
Do we know if Angel Lau is participating?
Yeah, I saw she's participating. Roseanne, you could maybe allow Angel to speak.
She's on the nonprofit committee, and she could answer that question. I mean, I can answer it, but she'll do a better job.
Angel, I'm getting ready to promote you to speaking. So feel free to come off mute now, Angel, if you'd like to answer that question.
Hi, I'm calling from the car. We're coming back from vacation. So
no pressure.
Oh, sorry to put you on the spot.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question for me?
Of course. It says, I believe it was mentioned that we reached out to 54 nonprofits to apply for the available grants. Can you speak to how we chose the 54 that we reached out to?
That's a great question. Thanks for asking it. This year, the Nonprofit Outreach Committee, they had 260 nonprofits that were invited to hand in a letter, an LOI. We also increased that number this year by approximately 20. And that was through collaboration with board members, other nonprofits in the community. So we had 54 that turned in an LOI, and I think all of them were invited to apply. Is that correct, Denise? Tracy?
all but we just had, well, we had one that applied twice. So that, one of those eliminated. And we had one that didn't meet the $250,000 budget requirement.
Okay, okay, so
all but two were asked to apply for full grants.
okay, that's great. Some of the ways that we tried to connect with our nonprofits in the community is we really wanted to focus on the quality of the application this year and the quantity, the number of applicants. Our president, Amy Lepp, and Lauren Combs, my co-chair, really did a great job with doing a webinar that focused on how to apply for our grants, but it also addressed some really interesting grant writing tips that really anyone, even if you weren't eligible, if you were a nonprofit, you could have benefited from that workshop. That recording was sent out to everyone on our list. And then we had weekly reminders every week that went out, reminding them about the LOI deadline. I hope that answered your question.
The LOI is open to the public. So we ask our board members, we ask our members to forward it to nonprofits that would be interested. So it's not a closed process where only people that are invited can apply. Now, the full grant application is a closed process, and you have to complete the LOI, which is public, in order to then receive the link for the full application.
And the questions in the letter of interest or the LOI are basic grant criteria. Do you serve Oakland County? Is your budget, or you know, are you at least $250,000? So it's our basic criteria. So it's a pretty, you know,
it's very short.
It's very short. It's pretty easy to fill out. Yeah.
Are there any more questions? Does it seem?
Of course, I'm talking and I'm on mute. There is one more question that I saw come through in the chat that I wanted to address. It says, are there expenses that are prohibited from being included in a budget?
So one of the requirements is that overhead expenses is less than 15% of the total budget. So we do recognize that nonprofits have overhead expenses with anything that they do. So I would say that has to be less than 15%, and that is a line item on that project budget that you see. In terms of other specific expenses, I would say nothing comes to mind other than like the general funding. We don't fund like endowment or bridge financing or like capital spend, kind of more the big bucket things that we don't, but line item expenses, nothing other than the overhead.
That's it for the questions in the chat and the Q&A. Now's the time, if anybody's been holding back, to go ahead and post something for us. In the meanwhile, any closing comments from Denise or Tracy or Colleen?
Just thank you very much for volunteering, and welcome to another grant cycle. This is the best part of what we do.
It can be really, really fun. I loved the group of women that I worked with. I loved learning about some organizations in our county doing great things. That's how they talked me into doing this job on the board.
I do think you're going to read through these grants and you're going to be amazed at all the good work people are doing. It's eye-opening.
Yeah, this really is like the most rewarding part, and we appreciate everyone kind of rolling with us on this new virtual world that we're working into. We hope that the virtual training and virtual meetings and everything will still make everyone feel included and excited and involved, because without you volunteers, we could never do what we're doing. So thank you.
Thank
All
you
right,
so
well,
much.
with that, I haven't seen any other questions in the Q&A or in the chat, so All right. Oh, and we got a shout out from Lisa. We've done great with transitioning to virtual. Thank you very much.
All right. Okay, good. Well, thanks everyone. And
you.
please reach out with questions and we'll look forward to working with you over the summer.
Yep. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Have a great rest of your week. Can you say bye now? Bye.
Thanks, Roseanne, for moderating.
Of course. My pleasure. Oh, yes. We'll send the deck out also, Audrey, of course.
Okay.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.